Hello, dear President Donald J. Trump, and free and patriotic citizens of the United States. I am very honored to be able to share a meaningful story with you today. The Republic of Korea is currently suffering from the invasions of the Chinese Communist Party and is currently in the midst of a hybrid warfare. In other words, I'd like to emphasize that the wartime situation is still ongoing. Therefore, under the active command of the UN commander, we must immediately activate wartime operational control to eradicate the Chinese Communist agent and North Korean Communist spies who are secretly active in Korea, and the anti-state forces who are trying to overthrow the Republic of Korea together with them. At the same time, we must root out all the spies and organizations and individuals connected to these foreign spies who are trying to harm the Republic of Korea. Eliminate the root of the impure forces and eliminate even a single enemy. Therefore, the story I am sharing today is very meaningful, and I honestly ask you to share it with President Trump. Today's topic is if a law were passed banning the export of Korean marine engines and German and Japanese marine parts to China, all shipyards in China would close within 6 months. Hello, this is Suyong Choi. English name is David Choi, the representative of the Indo-Pacific Strategy Institute in South Korea. I would appreciate it if you could forward this letter to President Trump and his staff. My email address is as below. If you want to contact me, please send me an email. DUSTWMD 7 at gmail.com. I'm a former case officer of the National Intelligence Service of the Republic of Korea, and I was a secret case officer who mainly dealt with North Korean and Chinese issues on the ground. I graduated from the Department of Chinese Language and Literature at Seoul National University and received a master's degree in Chinese consecutive and simultaneous interpretation from the Graduate School of Interpretation and Translation at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, and mainly worked in China, America, and Asia regions. First of all, I am always grateful to honorable American parents who sent 1,789,000 American young soldiers during the Korean War, and to the American taxpayers who invested $68 billion to rebuild the shattered Republic of Korea. And thanks to the missionary sent from the United States 130 years ago, the concept of individual freedom was included in the Constitution of the Republic of Korea. President Seungman Lee, who founded the Republic of Korea, received a bachelor degree from George Washington University, a master degree from Harvard University, and a doctorate from the Princeton University. As a result, the Constitution of the Republic of Korea was created in direct imitation of the Constitution of the United States. Currently, China has illegally installed offshore structures in the West Sea of the Korea Peninsula, in the joint waters of the China and the South Korea. China claims that they are fishing facilities, but the situation is very, very serious, with the South Korean and the Chinese Coast Guard vessels facing off. In the West Sea of the Korea Peninsula, China is installing additional maritime facilities of unclear purpose without any consultation with the Korean government, which is making it inevitable that the Korean Navy and the Chinese customs will clash sooner or later. Therefore, President Donald J. Trump please enact legislation to restrict Korean-made marine engines and marine parts from Japan, Germany, and other countries from flowing into China. Currently, the United States is imposing an embargo on all semiconductor equipment and semiconductor-related technologies from being exported to China, which has caused the Chinese semiconductor industry to collapse. Likewise, if an embargo were imposed on all marine engines and various marine parts, as well as the technology to produce them, from being exported to China, all shipyards in China would go out of business one after another within 6 months. 6 months. If this happens, Chinese naval ships will have no shipyard to repair, so their operating rates will drop significantly. Also, Chinese shipping companies will not be able to repair their ships, so they will go bankrupt one after another. This will have the effect of blockading China. China purchases parts for merchant ships from South Korea, Germany, and Japan to use on its naval vessels. So if all exports of merchant ship parts to China were to be blocked, the availability of Chinese naval vessels would drop sharply due to a shortage of repair parts. Our secret agents have been investigating Chinese shipyards for many years. As a result, they say that the durability of Chinese ship parts is currently unreliable. That is why all ship owners are requesting Chinese shipyards to install equipment from Korea, Japan, and Germany. In addition, since China purchases major parts from Korea, Japan, and Germany and installs them on merchant ships and naval vessels, if it were to block the export of ship engine and various parts from Korea, Japan, and Germany, it would be impossible for China to build and repair merchant ships and naval vessels. In particular, marine engines are exported in large quantities from Korea, and navigation equipment such as navigation radars, short-range communication equipment, and satellite communication equipment are almost entirely made by Japan's JRC. If all the Chinese shipyards close within 6 months, the price of building ship will rise sharply. Then, if you ask Korean shipyards to invest in the United States and build commercial ships, Korean shipyards will readily accept. Nowadays, HD Hyundai Heavy Industry has shipyards in Saudi Arabia and Vietnam. So it is not at all difficult for it to establish a shipyard in the United States and train skilled professionals. However, because the labor costs of American workers are too high, it is not cost comparative to build large-scale shipbuilding complexes and merchant ships in the United States. So they are not trying. However, if shipbuilding costs skyrocket because China is no longer able to build ships, building merchant ships in the United States will become sufficiently cost comparative. Once we destroy all the shipyards in China and convince them that it is profitable to build merchant ships in the United States, the big Korean shipbuilders will invest in the United States. Once it becomes profitable to build merchant ships in the United States, it will be possible to build and repair American ships right next to the merchant ship docks. If Korean shipbuilding companies were to be given incentives to invest in the United States, such as a deduction of amount from the tariffs on Korean product, the Korean government would also be positive about it. When the U.S. government sends an ambassador to Korea, if it sends someone familiar to the Korean people, such as Dr. Tara Oh or attorney lawyer Gordon Chang, the Korean people will be able to better understand President Trump's policies. Most of the Korean media still reports based on anti-Trump sentiment and hopes that President Trump will fail. I know that it is all fake news, disinformation. But since the Korean people only get news about the President Trump through the media, anti-Trump sentiment is growing. If anti-Trump sentiment in Korea increases, it will be difficult for the next Korean government to pursue pro-Trump policies. In order to effectively resolve the growing anti-Trump sentiment in Korea, it would be good for Korean American Dr. Tara Oh or attorney lawyer Gordon Chang, who serves as President Trump's mouthpiece, to become to Korea as ambassadors. The best scenario would be to send both of these people to the Korean embassy as ambassador and deputy ambassador. Here is the contents related to the presidential election in Korea. Currently, several candidates from the People Power Party have declared that they will run for the presidential election. However, The candidates that the people trust the most is Kim Mun-su. The Korean people suspect the other candidates of being Chinese spies because they were the ones who led the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. Candidate Kim Mun-su served as a member of the National Assembly for 12 years 3 times, then as the governor of the Gyeonggi province for 8 years twice, and then remained unemployed for about 8 more years. Everyone thought his political career was over and gave up. However, after being appointed as Minister of Labor in the Yoon Suk-yeol government, he effectively neutralized the Korean Confederation of Trade Union and the Democratic Party of Korea. Actually, he was a person who was influenced by communist ideology during his college years and worked hard in the socialist labor movement. According to his testimony, he converted in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, thinking that both communism and socialism had failed and that he was wrong. If you look at his words and actions over the past 10 years, he has been lecturing the public on why communism and socialism are wrong and failed. He has also been lecturing the public on why leftist groups operating in Korea are wrong and failed, and has pointed out that the communist activities of the Korean Confederation of Trade Union and the Democratic Party of Korea are wrong without any hesitations. While serving as a Minister of Labor, he constantly clashed with the Korean Confederation of Trade Union and the Democratic Party of Korea, but they could not logically defeat Kim Mun-su, and at some point, they began to avoid Minister Kim Mun-su. As of nowadays, Kim Mun-su is the only person who can save Korea, which is surrounded by communist forces. The key figure currently influencing Kim Mun-su is Professor Lee Young-hun, who is educating the public about the President Lee Seung-man's founding spirits. Candidate Kim Mun-su has been sufficiently educated by Professor Lee Young-hun on how deeply American missionaries were involved in the founding of the Republic of Korea. He is also well aware that the Constitution of the Republic of Korea was modeled after the Constitution of the United States, and that the ROK and U.S. military alliance was born on the basis of the ROK and U.S. Christian alliance. He has a clear understanding of the various communist riots that occurred during the process of founding the Republic of Korea. And when his political life ended, he traveled around the country, giving special lectures on modern and contemporary history of the Republic of Korea. Another key figure who is also moving candidate Kim Mun-su is international political scientist Dr. Lee Chun-gyun. Currently, candidate Kim Mun-su's foreign policy and security mentor is Dr. Lee Chun-gyun. And Dr. Lee Chun-gun deeply sympathized with the theories and the realities advocated by Lee Chun-gun. Kim Mun-su deeply sympathized with the theories and the realities and advocated by Dr. Lee Chun-gun. And he sympathized and advocates based on the same ideology and values in the field of international relations and diplomacy. Dr. Lee Chun-gun is a representative Korean international political scientist and a person who received a doctorate in international political science from the University of Texas. He is an international political scientist who gives special lectures to the public on President Trump's foreign and security policies in Korea and leads the anti-China movement. He also predicted the launch of the first Trump administration, and in the last presidential election, he claimed that President Trump would be elected by a landslide. But Joe Biden was elected due to election fraud, and he has been criticized for the past 4 years. This is the person who claimed that President Trump would be elected by a large margin in this presidential election as well. If candidate Kim Mun-su becomes the president of Korea, the top commander in foreign affairs and security will be Dr. Lee Chun-gun, who will be able to collapse the Chinese Communist Party by joining forces with Trump camp. Dr. Lee Chun-gun has given numerous lectures explaining to the Korean people how and why China will fail. He also lectured to many Koreans that purchasing large quantities of Alaskan energy would maximize the Korea's national interest. If Kim Mun-su becomes the next president of South Korea, he will purchase large quantities of Alaskan energy, and the project to install Chinese offshore wind power equipment worth about the $90 billion, which is currently being promoted by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration on the west coast of the Korea Peninsula, will be stopped. Dr. Lee Chun-gun has a thorough understanding of the U.S. military and maritime strategies, having served as an instructor at the Rock Army Academy. If candidate Kim Mun-su becomes president, the Korean administration will take the lead in intensively developing the Rock Navy to block the Chinese Navy's advance into the Pacific. If that happens, the United States will have no need to worry about China's expanding navy. Currently, the Yoon Suk-yeol government is using about $100 billion of its budget to support leftist groups, or NGO. If half of that money were converted to defense spending, South Korea's defense budget could be doubled. South Korea's current defense budget is about 2.7% of the GDP, but increasing it to 5% of the GDP would not be a problem. If that happens, China will engage in an arms race with South Korea, and its economy will collapse down. It is also quite possible for the South Korean government to provide the Philippine government with $10 billion security loan and arm it with South Korean-made ship and fighter jets. The South Korean government could lease a suitable island between Taiwan and the northern Philippines from the Philippine government to build a naval and air force base and block Chinese naval vessels and submarines operating in the South China Sea from advancing into the Pacific Ocean. If South Korea's Navy and Air Force were to build military bases on the islands between Taiwan and the Philippines, China will not be able to invade Taiwan. The budget for all this work could easily be done by South Korea alone. If half of the $100 billion in government funds given to leftist groups were diverted to defense spending. As of now, candidate Kim Mun-su becoming the president of Korea is the path that maximizes America's national interest and the only way to effectively implement President Trump's containment policy toward China. Let me introduce another person who is moving candidate Kim Mun-su. Jae-chul An. Mr. An is a Korean American. He published 6/25, June 25th Korean War in Pictures, Record of Freedom and Life, to widely commemorate the humanitarian activities of the U.S. military during the Korean War. He had spent about $2 million to acquire about 50,000 photos related to the Korean War while traveling to a museum across the United States for the past 25 years, and is currently holding a Korean War photo exhibition year-round outdoors near the U.S. Embassy in Korea. If candidates Kim Mun-su actively support An Jae-chul's Korean War photo exhibition, Minister of Labor Kim Mun-su attends the book launch event held in Seoul on December 7th, 2024, and given encouraging speeches. Representative Mr. An Jae-chul is one of the people who can communicate with candidate Kim Mun-su by phone and text messages. The forces currently supporting candidate Kim Mun-su in Korea are those who love the Republic of Korea and those who are pro-Trump. They had continuous prayer meetings for President Trump to be elected in the last election. But when candidate Biden was elected through fraud election, they received tremendous insults and ridicule in Korea. Nevertheless, in this U.S. presidential election, many people prayed to God in their churches for President Trump to be elected. And some went to the United States to attend prayer meeting hosted by the Trump camp. The pro-Trump forces in Korea are currently supporting candidate Kim Mun-su. Since he has been in a political vacuum for a long time, he has no political funds, so his network is weak and his uncompromising personality makes him unpopular in the corrupt Korean political world. However, many South Koreans are convinced that candidate Kim Mun-su is honest and that he has not received political funds from the Chinese Communist Party because he has been out of politics for a long time. They believe that he is the only candidate who can bring down the Chinese Communist Party and North Korea. The Korean people think that all the other candidates who ran for the People Power Party presidential election are Chinese spy or Chinese espionage. However, the political reality of Korea is full of all kinds of lies and manipulation of public opinion, and the Chinese Communist Party's hands is very, very strong. Most of the media has melted into the Chinese Communist Party's funds. And there is still the threat of election fraud from the Central Election Management Committee and the Chinese Communist Party. If the party primary were conducted normally, candidate Kim Mun-su would be elected as the presidential candidate from the People Power Party. But the reality is that there is a high possibility that the candidates will be replaced through election fraud. In order for him to be elected as the next president of South Korea, he needs God's grace and President Trump's full support. If candidate Kim Mun-su becomes president, he can expect full support from President Trump and the South Korean government throughout his term. He can join hands with the South Korean government to collapse the Chinese Communist Party. Dr. Lee Chun-gun, a foreign affairs and security instructor for candidate Kim Mun-su, he has already said that the cost of sustaining U.S. troops in Korea, $3.5 billion, should be 100% provided to the United States. He also claimed that if a United States naval base and Air Force base were built in Jeju Island with the Korean government budget, the Chinese Navy's advance into the Pacific Ocean could be blocked. If candidate Kim Mun-su becomes president, God's great grace will be bestowed upon the Korean and the American people. I would be grateful if President Trump would actively support candidate Kim Mun-su. Thank you for listening today. I pray that the infinite love and peace of God, the Father, will always be with President Trump and all Americans, everywhere, forever and ever. Thank you. I am the representative of Indo-Pacific Strategy Institute, 수영 최. Thank you again.